They said the war had ended, but no one told the silence. It still hung in the air, heavy as ash, thick as forgotten prayers. The streets had grown quiet, yes, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that follows a scream, the kind that makes your bones ache with something you unnamed. I remember walking through the ruins of what used to be a city, though now it was just broken concrete and burnt wallpaper and the smell of everything lost. My boots didn't make a sound, as if even they understood this place was holy in its grief. On a wall, half fallen, and pocked by shrapnel, someone had painted a message in chalk. We were here. No names, no dates, no plea for help. Just for words gasping against time's erasure. I stared at them for a long time, longer than I should have, because in those words, I didn't see desperation. I saw resistance, not the kind with guns and banners and speeches, but the quiet kind born when someone has nothing left except the will to be remembered. There was a child there once, no more than 6. I never knew his name. I only remember the way he held his sister's hand when they passed by, 2 ghosts in the gray morning light. Their clothes didn't match, their shoes were gone, and yet they walked with a rhythm that made the ruble look like a sidewalk. He saw me and nodded not, as a greeting, but as if to say, you see us, right, we still exist. And then they turned the corner and vanished like breath on glass. I never saw them again, but I hear them still. At night, when the wind presses against the windows, when the rain taps like fingers trying to be heard, I hear them, all of them. The ones who had no microphone, no press release, no monument, just a cry, a single cry swallowed by sirens, buried beneath falling bricks, drowned out by the next explosion. Cries that never made it past the smoke, cries that weren't newsworthy, cries that died with their speakers. That's what this is for. That 1 minute of silence we're asked to give every year, for remembrance, for the fallen, for the dead. But what about the unheard? What about those whose names were never recorded, whose final moments were lost, not in history but in indifference? What is the weight of a scream no one hears? What is the shape of a tear wiped away in the dark? What is the value of a lullaby never sung because the mother never came home? I think about that more than I should. I think about the echo of loss, not just the event. Because war doesn't end with treaties. It ends when the last echo fades. And even now, they're still echoing. There was a man I met, once an old man, frail and bent like a question mark. He sat outside a collapsed school with a tattered journal in his hands. He told me he was a teacher once. He used to read poetry to children under that roof. When the bombs fell, he ran back, not to save papers or possessions, but to recover the attendance sheet. I didn't want them to be forgotten, he whispered, tracing their names with a trembling finger. He said their names like prayers. Every morning, the village was gone. The desks were ash, but he remembered every child. That's when I realized silence can be sacred, but only if it carries memory. Otherwise, it's just neglect with a softer voice. So I began to listen, really listen, to the stillness, to the spaces between words, to the pauses in stories that no one dares to tell aloud. I listened for the sighs that never became sentences, for the names people skip over because they're too hard to say without breaking. And what I found wasn't just sadness, it was defiance. A quiet, burning defiance, like a candle left in the window long after the house has fallen, like a photograph kept in a pocket even when the face is faded, like a song hummed by a child who doesn't know the words but sings. Anyway, this 1 minute we give, what if we filled it with more than silence? What if we filled it with remembering, not of generals and victories and parades, but of the tiny lives caught in the cracks of conflict, the kind that never made it into textbooks, the kind whose only monument is a voice like mine, whispering into the dark, you mattered. What if we made this minute a sanctuary, not just for mourning, but for meaning? Because here's the truth, peace isn't born in conference rooms, it's born in classrooms, in playgrounds, in kitchens, in lullabies. And when those are destroyed, something in the human spirit falters. We forget how to hope. We forget how to speak gently. We forget how to listen for the cries too soft to be heard through gunfire. But we can remember, not by looking back with guilt, but by stepping forward with grace, by seeing the invisible, by honoring the silence, not as emptiness but as a space to be filled with care, so that when the wind blows through the ruins, it doesn't carry only sorrow. It carries stories, real ones, soft ones, true ones. And in that, maybe we heal. I once visited a memorial where the names of the fallen were etched into stone row upon row, carved with care, lit by the soft light of candles left behind. People came to touch the names, to leave flowers, to cry, and yet I stood there, numb, because as powerful as it was, I couldn't stop thinking about the names that weren't there, the ones no one wrote down, the ones lost in collapsed tenements, in bombed-out fields, in refugee camps that were never marked on any map. I thought of the boy with no shoes who sold bread at the corner before the tanks came. I thought of the girl who scribbled poems in the dirt behind the shelter. I thought of the mother who never stopped calling out her child's name long after the airstrikes had stopped answering. Where were their names? Who mourns those we never acknowledge? There was a story told by a relief worker I met once. She spoke of a town no longer on any government's records, where the children had stopped speaking. Not because they didn't have the words, but because no one had listened for so long. They forgot how to use them. She said the silence was thicker than smoke, that when the sun went down, you could hear the creak of empty beds, that she once saw a child draw a picture of her family with only shadows instead of faces. "This is us," he said. But after, she cried in front of him. She told me, he just nodded, like he'd seen it before. There are moments when the world breaks so quietly that no one notices until it is too late. Not with a scream, but with the soft closing of a door that will never open again. A spoon left untouched in a bowl. A letter with no stamp. A coat still hanging on a hook that will never be lifted. These are the signs of those who disappear without echo. The unnoticed endings. The unrecorded losses. We say war takes lives, but it also takes the space. Those lives would have filled the birthdays not celebrated, the songs not written, the children not born. Once, in a refugee camp, I met a boy who had memorized every country's flag. He pointed to each one, naming them in perfect sequence. "I want to find where I belong," he said. "Maybe one of them is mine." He didn't remember where he came from. The border was erased. His village was gone. His parents, he didn't speak of them. He just stared at the flags, eyes full of longing, as if they might speak back. I watched him for a long time, wondering if any flag would ever carry his story, or if he would remain like so many others, a citizen of silence. I tell you these things not to break your heart, but to open it wide enough to hear what has long gone unheard. Not the shouting of generals or the clamor of parades, but the whispers, the murmurs, the final breaths, the lullabies that stopped halfway through. Because there is power in listening. Real power. Not to fix or solve or rescue, but simply to witness. To hold space for pain without rushing to erase it. Sometimes I imagine the world pausing, a full 60 seconds of remembering. Not scrolling, not posting, just remembering. The way a mother traced the outline of her child's face on the wall with chalk, hoping they might come home. The way a father built a swing from scraps of metal, because his son asked to fly one more time. The way a brother kept setting the dinner table for two. What would happen if we carried those stories with us? Like stones in our pockets. Heavy, yes, but grounding, reminding us what matters. I once asked an old woman what she missed most before the war. She didn't say safety, or food, or even her family. She said, the sound of doors opening. I didn't understand at first, but then she explained. When someone knocks, it means they believe someone's inside. It means someone still expects kindness. During the war, no one knocked, only kicked, or broke, or stayed away. Silence wasn't peaceful. It was proof that hope had packed up and gone. So when we speak of silence, let us be careful. Let us not confuse it with peace. Let us not wrap it in ribbon and call it closure. Silence is only sacred when it carries truth. Otherwise, it's just absence pretending to be healing. And healing, that takes more than time. It takes remembrance. It takes telling the stories of those who didn't get to tell their own. It takes speaking the names that were never carved in stone. And maybe, just maybe, it takes a minute. There was a moment during one of the long nights when the shelling stopped just long enough for people to breathe that I heard the sound of humming. A woman, somewhere nearby, was singing not a song I knew, not one for performance, but the kind sung to keep your own heart steady. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even whole, just a thread of melody, thin as breath, winding its way through shattered buildings and smoke-stained streets. I don't know her name. I never saw her face, but I remember her voice, how it trembled but didn't break. That moment stayed with me, not because it was beautiful, but because it was defiant. Because in that brief hush between the bombs, she chose to fill the silence with something soft, something human, something that said, we are still here. I think of that often when people talk about war in numbers, death tolls, casualty counts, graphs, reports, as if suffering can be measured with digits, as if grief fits neatly into bullet points. But the truth is, what gets lost in war isn't just lives, it's stories left unfinished, sentences with no endings, a child's birthday without cake, a wedding dress never worn, a first kiss never had. These are the things that never make it into history books, but they live, ghost-like, in the air of every place touched by war. You can feel them if you stay quiet long enough. You can feel the weight of everything that could have been. Once, I sat with a father who showed me a notebook filled with tiny drawings. His sons, rockets, and houses and suns, with crooked smiles. He flipped the pages slowly, as if afraid they'd vanish. He used to draw a new one every day, he said. I don't know why I kept them. Maybe I thought if I kept them safe, he'd come back. But the boy didn't come back. The school collapsed. The notebook survived. And in those pages, joy was preserved. Color, hope, imaginational, caught between lines of graphite and silence. That notebook was heavier than any weapon I ever carried. We often say never again. We put it on banners. We teach it in schools. But still, it happens again and again. Because we forget. Because we turn away when it's inconvenient. Because we let statistics dull our empathy. That's why this minute matters. Not as a ceremonial pause, but as a reckoning. A reminder. A responsibility. It is a space carved out of noise, where we choose to remember those who were denied remembrance, where we choose to hear the million cries that were never answered, and they are still crying. In different languages, in different lands, but the sound is the same. A wail, a whisper, a breath caught in the throat. It echoes through tents made of tarpaulin, through cities with no light, through the dreams of those lucky enough to have survived. You can't outrun it. You can only face it. And facing it is how we begin to change. I remember a little girl, 5, maybe 6, who carried a meal. It was cracked, and the handle was missing, but she held it like treasure. When I asked her why, she said, "So I don't forget my face." I didn't know what to say. What could I say? That she was seen, that she mattered. She already knew how fragile identity becomes in the shadow of war. That mirror was her proof. And in a world that had erased so much, she was holding on to herself with all the strength her tiny hands could manage. What would happen if we did the same? If we held on to each other, not just those within reach, but the unseen, the unheard, the uncounted? If we looked past headlines and borders, and saw the child behind the number, the mother behind the rubble? What would change if we stopped treating peace as the absence of conflict, and started treating it as the presence of justice, of compassion, of memory? Because peace isn't passive, it's active. It's something we have to choose every day, in the way we listen, the way we speak, the way we remember. And it starts here, in the quiet, in the minute we choose to give, not because it's tradition, but because it's sacred. Not because they need it, but because we do. There is a room in every home that has seen war where the silence lingers longer than it should. A chair left empty at the dinner table. A pair of shoes that haven't moved in years. A picture frame no one dares to dust. These things speak louder than gunfire ever could. They are monuments not built with stone, but with memory. The memory is what saves us. Memory is what allows us to resist the forgetting. Because forgetting is what war depends on. It feeds on indifference. It grows in silence. And the only weapon strong enough to stop it is remembrance. You don't need to be a soldier to honor the fallen. You don't need to light candles in cathedrals or lay wreaths at statues. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is sit quietly and remember. Remember the boy who used to chase birds in the market square. Remember the girl who practiced her dance steps barefoot in the courtyard. Remember the mother who hummed lullabies she would never finish. You don't need to have known them. You just need to believe they mattered. And that belief is enough to keep their stories alive. Once, I stood in a field where no trees grew anymore. The ground was still poisoned by the war. But among the weeds, a single flower had bloomed, fragile, yellow, trembling in the wind. And I thought, if this can grow here, then so can peace. Not easily, not quickly, but truly. The kind of peace that isn't declared by politicians, but built by people, brick by brick, memory by memory, story by story. That flower had no audience, no applause. But it bloomed anyway, and that was enough. We live in a time of noise. Constant, relentless, deafening noise. Notifications, headlines, alarms. But amid all this sound, we forget how to hear. We forget how to sit still, to breathe, to feel. And so this minute, this 1 minute of silence, it becomes a revolution, a radical act, not of rebellion, but of reverence. 1 minute to hold the names that were never spoken. 1 minute to let the tears fall without shame. 1 minute to say, I didn't know you, but I carry you. Because peace isn't a gift we receive, it's a responsibility we share. And every cry we fail to hear makes the world a little colder, a little smaller, a little less human. So let us choose to listen. To the whisper of a child who never learned to shout. To the prayer of a mother with nothing left to pray for. To the echo of a father whose voice cracked one final time. To the song of a people who still dare to hope. And in listening, let us promise, not just to remember, but to act, to speak gently, to walk humbly, to protect the fragile, not with might but with meaning. 1 minute. That's all it takes, to remember, to honor, to change. So, close your eyes, breathe in the silence, and know that somewhere, in that quiet space between heartbeats, you are holding a million stories that were almost lost. And none of them are forgotten now.